The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of the Whitmore residence, painting the living room in warm golden streaks. Balloons bobbed gently in the corners, their pastel colors reflecting on the polished wooden floors. Streamers hung in delicate arcs, each one fluttering faintly as if dancing to a tune only they could hear. The aroma of freshly baked cake and roasted coffee lingered in the air, promising comfort and celebration. Today was Sarah Whitmore's 35th birthday, and the house buzzed with the quiet anticipation of friends and family arriving. Sarah herself moved through the room with a soft, effortless grace, laughing at small jokes and adjusting decorations that her husband, Tom, had carefully arranged. She wore a simple sky-blue dress that matched the color of her eyes, and her auburn hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders. The day felt perfect, or at least she wanted it to feel perfect. Tom Whitmore, a man whose hands bore the calluses of years spent in his modest garage, hovered behind her with a soft smile. His jeans were worn, his shirt slightly stained with oil, but there was an unmistakable tenderness in the way he moved around the room. He carried trays of drinks, straightened napkins, and meticulously placed party favors with quiet pride. Sarah often thought he looked like a man who belonged to the quiet strength of the earth, reliable, solid, and unwavering. But not everyone shared her view. Jenna, Sarah's younger sister, leaned against the doorway with her arms crossed, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on her forearm. She wore designer heels that clicked sharply on the floor, a stark contrast to Tom's scuffed work boots. "Do you really think this is the sort of party she deserves?" Jenna muttered to one of the cousins lingering nearby. "I mean, for her birthday." The words pricked Sarah's heart. She loved Tom, not for his wealth, his looks, or his social standing, but for the quiet kindness he carried in every gesture. Yet, the laughter and the whispered judgment that followed Jenna's words felt like tiny arrows aimed at the very core of her joy. Guests began to arrive, their voices filling the space with polite greetings and the clinking of glasses. Some noticed Tom immediately, his hands carrying a tray of drinks, the faint grease on his jeans, but most of the polite smiles quickly turned to thinly veiled smirks as they took in the modest surroundings, the old truck visible through the front windows, and the man himself. The tension was subtle at first. A cousin whispered, "He's really just a mechanic, right?" Another guest laughed, loud enough for a few nearby to hear. Sarah's cheeks burned, but she held her head high, trying to brush off the sting. Tom didn't react. He only smiled faintly at her from across the room, the kind of smile that said he understood and that he would not let the judgments pierce his calm. As the afternoon wore on, Tom presented Sarah with the gift he had spent weeks crafting, a small wooden jewelry box, its surface polished to a soft glow, engraved with delicate patterns he had carved himself. "Happy birthday, Sarah," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with a warmth that no one else could touch. For a moment everything seemed to stop. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she took the gift, tracing the smooth curves with her fingers. It was perfect, not because of its price or its sophistication, but because it was made entirely by the man she loved. Then the laughter began. Jenna's voice cut through the gentle hum of conversation. "Oh please. You made this yourself," she said, smirking. "How cute." "Really, Tom, I didn't know mechanics could carve things." Others joined in, some politely, some with sharper, crueler tones. "Does it come with a screwdriver set?" someone joked. "Or is this supposed to impress us with wood chips?" Tom remained silent, his expression unreadable. He watched them all, the relatives, the acquaintances, even the family friends who had come expecting a cheerful afternoon. Sarah felt her stomach twist. Each mocking word, each laugh, felt like a crack forming in the joy she had tried so hard to create. She opened her mouth to defend him, to tell them to stop, but the room seemed to drown out her voice. Instead, Tom stepped back slightly, holding the box close to him as though it were a shield and a treasure at once. There was no bitterness in his eyes, only a quiet patience that Sarah had always admired. He was used to this, she realized. Life had probably trained him for moments like these, and still, he bore it with a dignity that no one present could understand. The guests pressed on, Someone commented on the faded paint of Tom's old truck outside. Another chuckled at the rumpled shirt he had changed into after work. Jenna laughed loudest of all, her voice ringing through the room like a bell tolling a verdict. Sarah's hands clenched at her sides, but she forced herself to smile, to maintain a facade of composure. She couldn't let them see her despair, not entirely. Tom, meanwhile, moved among them with quiet observation. He helped Sarah's mother straighten a napkin, adjusted a chair for a guest, all the while enduring the mockery without a single visible sign of anger or hurt. It was almost as if he had built a shield of calm around himself, allowing the ridicule to pass over him without leaving a mark. As the party carried on, the teasing became sharper, more pointed. Guests began to make jokes about his intelligence, his capacity for success, and even his ability to provide for his family. Sarah wanted to shout at them, to tear into the arrogance and pettiness displayed before her eyes, but she remained silent, her heart aching. And then, when the laughter had reached its peak and the room had begun to settle for the cake and speeches, Tom moved, not with haste or anger, but with a quiet, deliberate presence. He stood, and the room fell into a soft hush, unsure of what to expect. First, no one recognized the shift. A few continued to exchange glances, expecting more jokes or more ridicule. But Tom cleared his throat, and every head slowly turned. His voice, calm and even, began to cut through the murmur of conversation. "For the past 5 years," he said, "I've been working on something in my garage. Something I never shared because it wasn't ready. Not for me, not for anyone else." His eyes swept over the room, finally resting briefly on Jenna's smirk, which faltered slightly under his steady gaze. He continued, voice quiet but firm. "I built a portable mechanics toolkit. Not just a tool chest, but a fully functional, compact system that allows anyone to perform repairs anywhere, without the need for a full garage." He paused, letting the words sink in, scanning the faces in the crowd. "I patented it last year, and recently sold the rights to a major company. The proceeds have taken care of our debts, funded our children's education, and secured a future for our family." The room went silent. Laughter ceased mid-air, and the smirks froze into open-mouthed shock. The relatives who had mocked him, the ones who had whispered cruelly, now stared, disbelief written across their faces. Sarah felt a sudden surge of pride and relief, her hands clutching Tom's arm as she realized the quiet strength she had always known had been silently building toward this very moment. For the first time that day, the room recognized him, not just as a mechanic, not as someone unworthy of attention, but as a man whose work, patience, and devotion had quietly reshaped their understanding of success. The guests remained frozen, their expressions shifting from shock to awe as Tom calmly lowered his gaze, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his lips. The weight of 5 years of silent labor, hidden ambition, and steadfast devotion now radiated through the room. Jenna's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flicking nervously between her sister and Tom. Her laughter had evaporated entirely, leaving behind a raw, unfamiliar humility. Sarah's chest swelled with pride, her fingers gripping Tom's arm tightly. She had always known the man she married was extraordinary, but seeing him stand there, unassuming, humble yet victorious, made her heart swell with a mix of admiration, love, and relief. The room's atmosphere shifted dramatically. Conversations that had been full of mockery now hung awkwardly in midair, replaced by tentative whispers and wide-eyed stares. One of the older relatives, Mr. Henderson, finally broke the silence. "I had no idea," he stammered, his usual composed demeanor cracked by astonishment. Others nodded in agreement, murmuring quietly among themselves. The collective realization that they had misjudged him so profoundly seemed to sink in. Jenna's face flushed, a combination of embarrassment and surprise. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Her arrogance had been dismantled not through confrontation, but by the quiet, undeniable proof of Tom's ingenuity and perseverance. Sarah's gaze met hers, a subtle yet unwavering reminder. The man she loved was worthy, not because of wealth or status, but because of the integrity and brilliance that had always defined him. Tom continued, his voice steady, calm, and confident. I never told anyone because this wasn't about recognition. It was about building something meaningful, for our family, for our future. I wanted to provide the life Sarah and our children deserve without relying on anyone's approval. His eyes met Sarah's, full of warmth and devotion, and she felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. The tension in the room began to transform into admiration. Guests who had scoffed earlier now found themselves reaching out with congratulatory gestures, tentative but sincere. That's incredible, Tom, one cousin murmured. I had no idea you were working on something like that. A friend who had been part of the laughter moments before extended a hand, his voice shaking slightly. I think I owe you an apology. Tom nodded graciously, accepting the gestures of respect without a hint of resentment. He had endured the mockery with patience, not for recognition, but because he knew that when the moment came, his actions and words would speak louder than anyone's laughter ever could. Sarah felt an overwhelming surge of pride and love for him. The man who had been ridiculed, underestimated, and dismissed had turned humiliation into triumph in the most elegant and understated way imaginable. Her heart swelled as she realized that this birthday, the one she had feared would be marred by judgment, had become unforgettable. Not for the cake, the decorations, or the gifts, but because Tom had shown everyone the depth of his character. Jenna finally found her voice, though it was quiet, hesitant, and far from her usual confident tone. I didn't know, she admitted, her eyes avoiding Tom's gaze at first. Then she looked up, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of humility. You've done more than I could have imagined. It was not an apology yet, not a full acknowledgement, but it was a start. Tom smiled faintly, acknowledging her words with a nod. Thank you, he said simply. No bitterness, no gloating, just calm, quiet dignity. The room slowly began to breathe again, the weight of the moment settling in. Guests approached Tom, offering congratulations, curiosity, and genuine admiration. Conversations that had been filled with ridicule transformed into questions about his invention, his process, and his journey. People wanted to understand how a man so unassuming could have accomplished something so extraordinary. Sarah's mother approached, placing a hand gently on Tom's shoulder. I'm proud of you, she whispered, her eyes shimmering with emotion. You've always had this strength, and now everyone can see it. Tom gave her a soft, grateful smile, his humility intact despite the attention. Meanwhile, Sarah felt a profound sense of relief. The man she had loved quietly, without need for validation or approval, had proven himself in the most remarkable way. Her admiration for him deepened, her respect expanding beyond words. She realized that love was not just about shared laughter or moments of joy, but also about witnessing the quiet resilience and brilliance of someone who persevered through doubt, mockery, and underestimation. Tom looked around the room, noting the transformation in every face. The relatives who had laughed now regarded him with awe. Friends who had whispered dismissively now leaned forward with interest. And Sarah stood beside him, her eyes reflecting pride, love, and unwavering faith. He had not sought this recognition, but it was undeniable now. Then came the subtle gestures of reconciliation. Guests who had mocked him reached out, offering smiles, nods, and even apologies. I shouldn't have laughed, one woman admitted quietly. You've worked so hard. We misjudged you. Tom accepted each acknowledgement with the same calm grace, never letting resentment cloud the moment. Jenna's transformation was slower, more deliberate. She had been so certain of her own judgment, so confident in her assessment of Tom's worth, that the revelation of his success shook her to the core. She studied him closely, noting the quiet strength, the patient endurance, and the undeniable brilliance that had been invisible to her for so long. Finally she stepped forward, her voice soft but sincere. I owe you an apology, Tom. I didn't see what was right in front of me. Tom nodded, the faintest warmth in his expression. "Apology accepted," he said simply. No bitterness, no triumph. Only the calm acknowledgement of what had always been true. The rest of the party unfolded in a new light. Laughter returned, but it was no longer cruel or mocking. It was genuine, full of warmth, admiration, and shared celebration. Guests approached Tom with curiosity and respect, eager to learn about his invention and the journey that had brought him to this moment. Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that the man she loved had not only preserved his dignity but elevated it to a level that left an indelible mark on everyone present. As the evening wore on, Tom and Sarah shared a quiet moment together, away from the crowd. She took his hand, her fingers entwining with his, and looked into his eyes with a love that had grown deeper, stronger, and more profound than ever before. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with emotion. Tom smiled, his eyes reflecting the same warmth. "I didn't do it for them," he said quietly. "I did it for us, for our family, for you, for the life we've built together." Sarah felt tears prick the corners of her eyes as she realized the depth of his devotion, the quiet strength that had carried them through years of challenges, doubt, and underestimation. And in that moment, surrounded by friends, family, and the remnants of laughter that had once stung, Sarah understood something profound. True triumph was not in wealth, status, or recognition, but in the quiet, steadfast pursuit of love, integrity, and the betterment of those you hold dear. The evening continued, but the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. Where mockery once hung in the air, respect and admiration now flowed freely. Guests whispered among themselves, their eyes lingering on Tom with newfound appreciation. Some even approached Sarah, expressing awe at her choice of husband, realizing that humility, intelligence, and quiet perseverance often outshine ostentatious displays of wealth or status. Tom, however, remained unassuming. He smiled politely, answered questions about his invention with calm clarity, and never once allowed the attention to inflate his ego. To him, the invention was simply a means to an end, a better life for his family. He had never sought validation, only the satisfaction of knowing he could provide, protect, and nurture those he loved most. Sarah watched him closely, her heart swelling with pride. The man who had been underestimated, laughed at, and dismissed had now become the center of admiration, not through arrogance or boasting, but through silent diligence and quiet brilliance. She realized that love, respect, and admiration were not earned through wealth, status, or flashy gestures. They were earned through character, integrity, and unwavering devotion. Her sister Jenna lingered at the edge of the room, still processing the events. The transformation in her demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. The smug confidence she had carried so effortlessly had given way to reflection, humility, and perhaps even a hint of remorse. She approached Sarah, hesitating for a moment before speaking. I didn't realize," Jenna admitted, her voice low but sincere. "Tom, he's more than I ever imagined." Sarah nodded, giving her sister a reassuring smile. "It took time for all of us to see it," she said gently, her eyes glancing toward Tom, who was helping a group of young cousins examine a miniature version of his portable toolkit. Jenna's gaze followed his movements, her expression softening as she observed the patience, the care, and the humility with which he interacted with the children. In that moment, she finally understood what Sarah had always known. Tom's worth was not measured by his job, his clothes, or his truck. It was measured by his heart, his mind, and the quiet impact he had on the people around him. Meanwhile, the party continued, but it now carried a new energy. Conversations shifted from shallow judgments to genuine curiosity. Guests asked Tom questions about his invention, how he had developed it, and what inspired him to pursue such an ambitious project in secret. Each answer he gave was thoughtful, measured, and insightful, further solidifying the respect he had earned in a matter of minutes. Sarah felt a sense of fulfillment unlike any she had experienced before. The man she loved had not only endured humiliation with grace, but had turned it into a moment of triumph that none could ignore. Her admiration for him deepened, her pride overflowing. She realized that love and respect were inseparable when built on a foundation of integrity, perseverance, and quiet determination. As the evening drew to a close, Tom and Sarah stood together near the edge of the room, watching guests mingle and laugh, not at him but with him. Children clustered around Tom, fascinated by the miniature toolkit, while adults engaged in animated conversations about his invention. Even those who had been the most mocking now treated him with genuine admiration and respect. Tom turned to Sarah, his eyes warm and full of affection. "Did you see that?" he asked softly, a smile tugging at his lips. "They finally see it, not just the invention but the person behind it." Sarah nodded, her eyes shining. "I've always seen it," she whispered, taking his hand and pressing it to her chest. "And I always will." The moment was quiet, intimate, and filled with unspoken understanding. It was a celebration not only of Sarah's birthday but also of the enduring strength, resilience, and brilliance of the man she loved. In the midst of laughter, applause, and admiration, the true triumph was clear. Tom had turned ridicule into respect, judgment into admiration, and doubt into certainty. Later, as the last guests departed and the room fell silent, Sarah and Tom stood together in the quiet aftermath of the celebration. The decorations twinkled faintly in the dim light, the remnants of laughter still lingering like echoes in the air. Sarah looked at her husband, her heart overflowing with love and pride. "You made this birthday unforgettable," she said softly, her fingers brushing against his cheek. Tom smiled, the faintest shadow of humility in his expression. "Not because of the party," he replied, "but because of the moment. Because of what we've built quietly together. That's what matters." Sarah felt a surge of emotion she could barely contain. The man who had once been laughed at, underestimated, and dismissed had shown her, and everyone else, the power of patience, perseverance, and quiet brilliance. Her admiration for him had always been strong, but now it was absolute, unwavering, and all-encompassing. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Sarah reflected on the transformation that had occurred. What had started as a birthday party, a seemingly ordinary celebration, had become a moment of revelation, triumph, and respect. Tom had turned humiliation into an opportunity to reveal the truth of his character, leaving everyone present with a profound sense of awe and admiration. Jenna approached once more, this time with a tentative smile. I see now," she admitted softly. "You were right about him all along, Sarah. He's incredible." Sarah smiled warmly, squeezing her sister's hand gently. "Sometimes it takes time for people to see what's in front of them," she replied. "But when they do, it changes everything." Tom and Sarah stepped outside into the crisp night air, the soft glow of streetlights illuminating their path. Hand in hand, they walked toward their car, hearts full, spirits lifted, and the quiet knowledge that their lives had changed in ways that went far beyond the party. As they drove away, Sarah glanced at Tom, her eyes reflecting both love and admiration. "I'll never forget this day," she said softly. Tom's smile was gentle, calm, and content. "Neither will I," he replied. "Not because of the celebration, but because of what it revealed. About us, about perseverance, and about the power of quiet strength." And in that moment, Sarah understood a truth she had always known but now felt more profoundly than ever. True respect and admiration are earned not through wealth, status, or recognition, but through integrity, patience, and the unwavering pursuit of what truly matters. From that day forward, Tom was no longer just Sarah's humble, hard-working husband. He became a symbol of perseverance, quiet brilliance, and the extraordinary power of turning ridicule into triumph. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered acknowledgement of his character reminded Sarah, and everyone who witnessed it, that the measure of a person is never in what the world sees, but in what they quietly achieve when no one is watching. And so, Sarah's 35th birthday became unforgettable, not for the cake, the decorations, or the party itself, but because her husband had transformed humiliation into triumph, laughter into respect, and doubt into admiration. From that day onward, everyone who had once doubted or mocked him understood that true greatness often comes quietly, patiently, and without the need for validation. Tom held Sarah's hand as they walked into their home, a quiet smile on his face. "We did it," he said softly. "Not for them but for us." Sarah leaned into him, her heart full. "Yes, we did. And I couldn't be prouder of you." In the end, it wasn't the party, the gifts, or the laughter that made the birthday unforgettable. It was the revelation of a man's quiet strength, unwavering dedication, and extraordinary character. A reminder that true respect and admiration are earned, not given. And in that quiet, triumphant moment, Sarah realized that love, pride, and admiration could be limitless when grounded in integrity, devotion, and the courage to be extraordinary, even when no one expects it.